learning to control the banking function is the most profitable thing that you can do over a lifetime. Banking is the most profitable business in the world. Start becoming your own banker and you too will be profitable.
Welcome to the Bankless by Design podcast, where we rethink money, ditch the system, and rediscover what it means to truly thrive well. I'm Tricia Miller, mom of 7, financial coach, and founder of Thrivewell. Around here, we believe wealth is more than numbers. It's about freedom, stewardship, and building a legacy that lasts. If you're ready to challenge the norm and take back control of your financial life, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Bankless by Design podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Jonathan and I are going to be going over a section in Nelson's book, Becoming Your Own Banker. It's part of our series titled The Problem. And Nelson was a firm believer that you cannot come up with a solution until you really understand what the problem is. So, Jonathan, if you would like to start right at the very top, we'll go from there.
All right, this section, the problem, starts with a little Bible verse snuck in there at the top. And it says, when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? John 5:6.
All right. The first few times I read through this section, I didn't even pay that verse any mind. If I saw it at all, I just sort of thought, that's kind of interesting. I wonder why that's there. But one time as I was studying, I got to thinking, Nelson was a serious Christian and he was pretty intentional with everything that he did. So I thought to myself, I'm going to figure out why that's there. I'm going to look it up in the scriptures, find out what the context is of this particular scripture. And I did. And of course, it is the lame man that is by the pool of Bethesda. And if you look at this context, it's actually very interesting. Jesus is coming into Jerusalem at the time of the feast. He's going through the sheep gate. There's so much symbolism here because he is actually the Lamb of God. The sheep gate was the place where they kept the sheep prepared for sacrifice. And of course, he would be the ultimate sacrifice. And then the pool of Bethesda is actually the pool that kept the water in service for the temple. And around that pool, there were 5 porches that were covered by roofed colonnades. And the scripture says that in these lay a multitude of invalids. So all over these porches around this pool. And this multitude consists of the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. One man, it says, was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there lying a long time, he said to him, do you want to be well? So here is just an interesting setup in this scenario because you see this multitude of people lying around this pool, and legend has it. In fact, I also discovered that verse 4 is not necessarily in all of the scripture translations because some people say it really wasn't in the original where it talks about the angel of the Lord stirring the waters, because this is really more or less a legend that the people believed. And of course, I'm sure being connected to the temple, there's this idea of sacredness to these waters, some kind of special powers. So they all believe that when that moment comes, which who knows how often, but probably not very often, the first person who could get into that water would be healed of their disease or their infirmity of whatever sort it might be. So you have this scene where Jesus is walking through and he sees the multitude. Of course, he always has compassion on the people. And he sees this one particular lame man who's been there for 38 years. But the curious thing is the way Jesus frames the question. Do you want to get well? Well, I know when I read that, I thought, Jesus, why are you asking that question? Like, it seems so obvious. In fact, it almost seems a little rude. And of course, there's times when Jesus says things that you're just like, it's not what I expected to come out of the mouth of Jesus, But then I have to step back and say, okay, why is it being said this way? He's not rude. He clearly knows something about the man that I don't know. about his heart, perhaps, that he's getting at. So when you realize it, you think, well, maybe he really didn't think the man was so willing to get well. Or maybe he was trying to show the man something, maybe, I don't want to say shock factor, but almost that, let me wake you up. So maybe there is a little shock factor there, and recognize that you're looking in the wrong direction. So I have come to believe that this is what Nelson was seeing in this passage. Jesus looks at this man and says, do you want to get well? And of course, his answers reveal the man's core beliefs, shall we say. And even in his excuses, it reveals it. Because listen to this. He says, I have no one to put me in the pool. So you can see there that he, number one, absolutely believes that the only answer is getting in that pool. But he says he doesn't have anybody to get him there. He's lame, right? So he's dependent on some outside person, someone else, to get him to this point of healing. There's also this idea that everybody believes that only the first person that gets in that water can actually be healed. So there's a mindset of it's only for a privileged few. And it's not something that can be given to all, right? It's a scarcity mindset. And of course, there's a little bit of luck involved here too. Like, did you happen to see the pool get stirred? Did you get there quick enough? All of these things are at play here when Jesus says, do you want to get well? And so the lame man gives all of these explanations rather than just answering Jesus, yes, I do. Isn't that interesting that he immediately comes up with his excuses or explanations, as you will, to why he hasn't been healed, which is also a little curious. And then Jesus says to him, get up, take up your bed and walk. And the one thing about the way Jesus says that to him, it's a command, of course, but it's also not coddling him. He didn't say, oh, well, let me help you. Let me pick you up and carry you down to the water. No, because Jesus knew that the water wasn't the solution. Jesus himself is the healer. Jesus is the creator of the water. He's the creator of the lame man. And he's saying to him, you have had your focus in the wrong place. Your core belief was it was the pool of water that was going to heal you, when in fact, the healer is standing right in front of you. So now get up, take up your bed and walk. It's requiring something of the man, because if the man truly believes that Jesus is the healer, he will obey him and he'll actually get up and walk. So there's this personal responsibility, this action that's also being demonstrated here. Once the lame man realizes my focus has been in the wrong place. So many things there that could be unpacked as it relates to our financial condition. And I think the reason Nelson puts this right in the very beginning of this passage, I think is twofold. Because first of all, the passages from the scriptures. Nelson is a firm believer in Jesus Christ. He is a student of the Word of God, and he would regularly open his presentations to people about the infinite banking concept with statements like, if you don't have faith in Jesus and you don't get that right, none of the rest of this matters anyways. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world but to lose his soul? And that was Nelson's true belief. Without Jesus, it doesn't do a hill of beans to get your finances in order. In addition to that, he's also saying, look at this picture. You have an entire area with all of these lame, paralyzed, blind people laying here, looking, hoping for an answer. And they're looking in the wrong direction, but they all believe it. So there's this group think, this mindset. They're sure that that's the answer. They were so sure that this man waited for 38 years. Like, just imagine that for a minute. It's crazy. And yet, is it so crazy, or is it what we all tend to do? If we're convinced that that's the solution, would we not also be there right alongside him? So Nelson is setting us up. If you take the time to read this and to dig into it, which I didn't do, I confess, for a long time, to say you're going to have to change what you think is the solution. You're going to have to change your mind. You're going to have to rethink your thinking, famous saying of his, because you're so convinced that the solution is XYZ, when in fact, it's a complete paradigm shift. And as it was for this lame man. So it is easy for us to be comfortable with the things that we think we know, right? And so I would just challenge you, do you really want to get well? And if so, are you willing to take a second look to see if what you have been focused on is really the problem, and if what you think is the solution is really the solution? So Jonathan, I'm just curious, what did you think about that? Did you have any comments on that first?
The only thing that kind of came to my mind was what you were saying about how it almost feels a little gruff with the way Jesus is speaking to the man. And you said that he wasn't coddling him, which I think is reaffirmed by, he asked him almost a rhetorical question. It's like, right. Do you want to get well? Like to your point, like it's not rude, but it's kind of like a correcting parent. Like, do you actually want to get well? Do you really? And then again, I think it just perfectly parallels that this is a correction or a command, because like you said, the man immediately goes to excuses and, here's why I'm not answering the question that was asked. He immediately is spitting out excuses. So I think you're right in the fact that Jesus obviously knows something about this man's heart that we don't have, but the context definitely shows it in the fact that, he's correcting him and he's being a little bit firm-handed. And then, like you said, he finishes it with a command. So that's what I really took away from it, was that, there was clearly this, correction that was being had.
Correction, but correction that really is love and compassion, because at the end of the day, he has healed the man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that's great. So now we're going to get into the financial side of things here, the problem that Nelson puts forward. But before we begin, I was just curious. I know a little bit about a lot of the conversations that my generation is having. We're looking at retirement and concerns about all of that. But I'm just curious what you hear, what people would say is the real problem, what they're struggling with, and even what they might be looking to for their solution.
Yeah, I would say I particularly sometimes feel out of touch with my generation. I know that I tend to think of things maybe a little bit differently or take a non-standard approach just because of who I am as a person. So that's just my natural way of being anyways, is to question, the narrative, question the main way of doing things, and maybe try and find something else. But I think that certainly all of us are feeling the pressures of rising costs and not feeling like our wages are matching those rising costs. I don't think that people really recognize maybe the root of that inflation and the rising costs, but that's just what they see, is that the grocery bill is getting higher. My gas bill is insane. My heating bill is crazy. The electricity, and all these things, it just keeps going up and up and up. And it doesn't feel like my wage is following that trend. So I definitely hear that a lot. I feel that. I think there's a sense of, will I ever be able to own a home? I hear that a lot. I think a lot of people my age have kind of accepted that they might have to rent their entire lives and might never become a homeowner, which I know that there's good and bad in that. And, for some people's situation, all those things. But I think that's just kind of, 30 years ago, that'd be crazy to say, or 50 years ago, that wouldn't just be the norm. So I think that there's a lot of pressure around that. There's a lot of struggle to think about even having children. Most people my age, that's a big conversation point, is, are you going to have kids? Oh, well, maybe one. At that point, we're not even maintaining our population if we're all having one.
Because it's just too expensive.
Yeah, it's too expensive, oh my God, how could you afford diapers? that kind of thing.
I heard that a lot when I had 7 of them, so I understand it. And yes, they are expensive. But yes, more so today. I can totally see that.
Yeah. So there's that. So I think the solution, that's presented is, of course, make more money. And I think there's a lot of blame about like the degrees that people get. No, you're getting a liberal arts degree or whatever. I mean, I got a business degree and I got a good job out of college, but the reality is that higher earning jobs are just harder to come by. The job market's very intense, very competitive. You don't go into a shop anymore and ask for a job. Like, it's not the way. You have to go through 5 or 6 interviews. It's a lot, and I think a big part of that boils back down to time. Like, people, you get a job and you're able to pay your bills, and well, do you even have time to pursue another opportunity? So I think that's a struggle. And I think a solution that's presented is, again, like, cutting costs in any way. So stop your $7 lattes, stop your door dashing. Which, yes, DoorDash is crazy expensive, but it's often like the small commodity things that get targeted rather than the root cause. And I think it's always pretty easy to just be like, oh, well, you're spending too much. And a lot of our generation does. We do. We're a big commodity generation, right?
But we're still, yeah. You have Legos in the
I have Lego behind me. No,
yeah. And that's part of your solution is the side hustle.
Yeah, side hustle. Yes, 100%. A lot of young people are finding that, whether it's through social media, whether it's through eBay or reselling or whatever, they're trying to do anything they can to, make ends meet or to even get ahead. Really, it feels like you have to be doing something in addition to a 9-to-5 to get ahead. If you're just working a 9-to-5, you're maintaining, you're not getting anywhere. At least it feels that way.
Sure.
And I will say, young men my age, what I saw was the legalization of gambling in real time in the United States. It used to be that you had to go to Vegas or very select places, Indian reservations allowed it, those kind of things where you actually had to go and seek out gambling. And then during COVID, I remember it was my sophomore year of college, gambling was legalized and started just state after state after state. I remember it was just announced, boom, boom, boom. They fell like dominoes and you could just watch it. Everybody my age was betting on absolutely everything they could. It was football season. We're betting on football. Oh, it's baseball now. Oh, and it got to the point where they couldn't like satisfy this need to bet on something that I had friends betting on cricket games in India because it was the only sport that they could bet on at the time.
Wow.
And I think that rabbit hole has now led us to these things like Kalshi. And Kalshi is this betting app that is now basically commodifying our existence by allowing you to bet on literally anything. And I think that's where that's gone, right? It's because, well, there's not a game on I can't bet on. What can I bet on now? Well, you can bet on this YouTuber to say a word, or you can bet on the United States to invade Iran, or you can bet on whatever you want. And it's crazy. I saw their commercial yesterday as we're preparing for the Super Bowl that $250 million have been placed in bets on their platform alone for the Super Bowl 2 days before. So
wow,
who knows where it's
I had
at
no
now.
idea. You've definitely taught me something new. I must live under a rock.
No, and that's all what my generation does is bet. I see it all the time. And I don't, if you win and you're good, whatever, like all credit to you. But I think the average daily person, is really just finding it's a way to make themselves poorer. And I'm sorry, but betting companies are designed to make profit.
Yeah, the game is rigged in their favor, no doubt.
Always.
They know the odds. And that's really sad to me because to me that speaks of a desperation of your generation. And if you're listening to this, that just takes me to The Richest Man in Babylon right off the bat and the whole chapter on Lady Luck. Mm-hmm. And that is so instructive. I never played the lottery or anything like that. That just wasn't something that I always felt like that was just a sure loss. Maybe I just never felt like I was going to be lucky. I don't know. But reading that was really helpful for me to go, you know what? That is such a risk. And that is a sure way to poverty, honestly. So to me, that's really sad too, that has become legalized in the sense that it's almost could feel, I don't want to say intentional, but if you want to, you want to take the money, transfer the wealth away from the people.
So easy.
Yeah.
$250 million in a day, right?
Wow.
And now it's more accessible than social media, right? It's on your phone.
Wow.
You can bet on your phone, on any app. There's hundreds of them.
That's crazy. All right.
So, yeah.
Well, that is definitely insightful to your generation.
I will say I witnessed plenty of times people my age, my friends going, well, this is my last $5. Hope I win. Genuinely going down to their last pennies, betting pennies because they used up all their money. Like, yeah.
Okay. Let's hope that we can give some better hope for people so they don't have to be quite that desperate. Let's read what Nelson has to say about the problem. And I think we're probably going to just read the first two paragraphs straight through and then talk about it if we would.
Okay. Sounds good. Several years ago, I did a good bit of study on the spending habits of American families. Since that time, I have kept an eye on the figures and the proportion of income allocated to each category. This seems to be the current situation, which doesn't seem to change all that much. I build scenarios around the all-American family because I don't want people to think you have to be rich to create a banking system that can handle all of your needs for finance. This young man is 29 years old and is making $28,500 per year after taxes. What does he do with his after-tax income? 20% is spent on transportation, 30% is spent on housing, 45% is spent on living, clothes, groceries, contributions to religions and charitable causes, boat payments, casualty insurance on cars, vacations, etc. Many of these items are financed by charge cards or banknotes. The balance is financed by paying cash for them and thus giving up interest that could be earned otherwise. He is saving less than 5% of his disposable income, but to be as generous as possible, let's assume that he is saving 10% and spending only 40% on living expenses. This is giving him every benefit of the doubt on the matter of savings. Just remember that the real situation here is at least twice as bad as what will be depicted.
Okay. So originally this book was written in the year 2000, so it's dated a little bit. We can see that when we look at the numbers. And of course, I think this fifth edition was in 2008, so I don't know if he revised those numbers or not. Nevertheless, it doesn't really matter. I like the fact that he is talking about a 29-year-old. So he's not talking about somebody becoming their own banker who's in their 50s or 60s and has a lot of wealth underneath them. So hope for your generation.
29,000 after taxes still feels relevant today.
Yeah, probably a little bit. That's kind of sad too. All right. It is interesting to me. One of the things I'll just mention about it being a little bit dated is that he obviously chooses a young man at age 29 and assumes a family. So there is an assumption there that this 29-year-old has a family and can have a family on that income. So you were already bringing that up. The point being, and I have it underlined in my book, I don't want people to think you have to be rich to create your banking system that can handle all your needs for finance. Two things in there. You don't have to be rich. And that you have a need for finance. Okay. So let me just say, anyone can do this. It doesn't matter how much money you're making, not making, where you're at. Just like this lame man, the real question is, do you want to get well? And if so, you will demonstrate that desire, that willingness by taking action. So if you really want to get well, just know you can do this from wherever you are. It's all relative to your personal economy. You won't need as big of a banking system if you have a smaller income to handle your need for finance, but it will get you to a place where you can begin to grow. All right. I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit because for me as a younger person starting, I started with what I could do, and it's so funny because you said that what you always deal with is that people start with what they can do. And then they always realize that they could have done more. And then you always kind of regret not making it a little bit bigger. But like for me, I started with a $6,000 policy, which isn't anything huge, but it gives me the ability to finance at least small, immediate needs and to start building that system. And in short time, it's increased, and I've paid a second year and I we made it flexible to have a little bit higher PUA ability, to pay a little bit more above what my $6,000 policy was built for. But yeah, so you can really start with just where you're at.
That might sound large to some people.
Yeah.
And that's okay. If it is, It can be less than that. The important part is get started. Take action. All right. Then he goes on to say that 20% is spent on transportation. In fact, if you have a copy of the book, there's a picture in the middle of the book that shows a bar chart that demonstrates this. 20% on transportation, 30% on housing, and 45% on the rest of your living expenses. So he drills it down pretty simply. And just to see, he says it's all relative and it doesn't change much. So I took a look, and according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, housing is actually right now at 32.9% as an average. So this is saying 32.9, almost 33. Transportation is 17. That's interesting to me because when you add the two up, they're still both 50%. So Nelson is pretty doggone right on target here. Also, he talks about savings, and he says it's less than 5%, but he's going to be generous and let them have 10% and assume the best, but just keep in mind that it's actually twice as bad is what he's saying. And as of 2025, the actual statistics for the average savings rate in America is 4.4%. So again, still on target.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'd be really curious on what they're considering savings, on if they're counting 401k investments in that or not.
I'm sure they are. That is one thing. People have really lost sight of the difference between saving and investment because we get told all the time, save for retirement. Well, where is that happening?
In a 401k?
In a 401k or an IRA, a mutual fund of some sort, right? Those are not savings vehicles. So let's just define that for a second. Savings versus investment. Saving is about low risk, accessible cash to be able to cover an emergency or a short-term goal. Okay. So it's more having no risk or very low risk where you can actually get to that money when you need it. Investment is more about growth. It's prioritizing growth over, say, security, right? There's the difference. And so we're looking for growth long-term. So we're investing our money. Well, I'm a firm believer that we should be saving something before we're investing because we need that security first. And unfortunately, people don't feel like they have the option to do both. So they just jump right into the investing piece and they don't think about that. They're assuming it's their savings. And I am also surprised at how many people don't realize how inaccessible it is once they do that. I think that comes as a big surprise to people when all of a sudden, that it's my money. Why don't I have access to it? Well, it's actually under lock and key if it's in a government program with penalties and taxes if you touch it. And I can't remember what the statistics are, but I looked it up one time and the percentage is quite high of how many people actually touch it and pay those penalties because life happens. They need access to their dollars and they can't get it. Not to mention the risk, not to mention the tax piece. So,
I think again, it comes down to being intentional with our words. We're investing for retirement, not saving for retirement.
That's true. That's true. That's a good habit to really make sure we are defining our terms carefully. Okay. So everything is pretty black and white here, except for one little piece that I think could be missed if we're not careful. He says many of these items are financed by charge cards or bank notes. So in other words, we're going to a third party lender, usually for our housing, often for our cars, transportation, things like that. But the balance is financed by paying cash for them and thus giving up the interest that could be earned otherwise. So this is something, it is just assumed, well, it's even taught that paying cash is less expensive. You're not financing. You're not paying interest. But what we're not taught about is the opportunity cost. Because when you pay that cash, the money's gone. It can no longer grow for you. So all of the growth that you might have otherwise had on that money has now. Nelson teaches elsewhere in the book that everything you buy is financed. Everything. There's no such thing as not having a cost to capital. So whether you pay interest to a third-party bank or whether you give up interest by paying cash, there is always a cost. Therefore, everything is financed. And this is a key piece to understanding the infinite banking concept. And it's kind of snuck in here in a sentence or so. And so I just want to make sure that we don't miss that. Okay?
Yeah. It's
all right.
Pretty much the opportunity cost of lost, like potential interest that you could have earned reutilizing that money elsewhere.
Right. So that is a part of your future wealth that is now stripped from you.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go ahead and read the next two paragraphs, I think, all the way down on the right-hand side of page 17.
Okay. The problem is that all these items are financed by other banking organizations. An automobile financing package for this hypothetical person is $10,550 for 48 months with an interest rate of at least 8.5%, with payments of $260.05 per month. But if you will check with the sales manager of an automobile agency, you will find that 95% of the cars that are traded in are not paid for. This means at the end of 30 months, if the car is traded, 21% of every payment dollar is interest. Even if he goes the full 4 years, the portion of every payment made is still 20%. This means that the interest portion of every dollar spent is perpetual. It never seems to dawn that the volume of interest is the real issue, not the annual percentage rate. For a real thrill, go to see the sales manager of the high-priced cars and ask him what percentage of the cars that leave their car lot are leased. The answer will probably be 75% or more. This is worse than financing a car purchase. When you go to the doctor's office to get a shot of some kind, the criteria is not the rate at which the medicine is injected into you, it is the volume. Too little and it won't do any good, too much and it can kill you.
Okay. So he's really emphasizing here the volume of interest over the rate of interest. So when you think of the volume of interest, you actually have to think of the actual dollars leaving your personal economy. So here he's showing the price of a car, which is a little hilarious too, at $10,550. And even the fact that it can be financed for 48 months. Most vehicles today are being financed 5, 6 years, maybe even 7 years today. So this just adds to the perpetual nature of this financing. You know, he puts in here 21% of every payment dollar is interest. And even if you pay the whole thing off, which most people don't. But I like to think of these percentages, especially when you're talking about a dollar, is really like the cents, right?
Yeah.
It's actually 21
cents. Yep.
of every dollar is going to interest.
It's crazy.
On this, but we don't think about it that way because we've been told that we have an 8.5%. So that doesn't sound bad. I mean, even that might sound a little high today.
My 6-year car, when I financed part of my car through Honda and the rest through our family banking. It was 6% at 6 years. Or
Okay.
7. Yeah.
Yeah. So not too far off, but still it's 21 cents of every dollar. When you think about it that way, that's quite a little chunk off the top of our dollars, especially if you think about the number of dollars that is happening to.
Mm-hmm.
So just to kind of clarify, that volume of interest is really the amount of actual dollars leaving your personal economy on a regular basis for whatever loans you might have out there. And this also speaks to the grocery store example about the can of peas on the shelf, right? We talked about that margin of profit was really small, but if you could flip those cans of peas, you could create a volume. Well, that was toward our benefit. This is us perpetually having interest leaving our economy. So in this sense, it's working against us, but we want to change that and make it work for us. Okay. Any other thoughts on that passage before we continue?
I think, okay. So when I look back and I think back on my personal finance class that I had in high school, sophomore, junior year, we were taught to focus on the percentage rate for sure. It was always about trying to get a reduced percentage, or it was reducing the interest overall, but it was always talking about like reducing the factors that applied to the interest. So oh, if you can reduce the time period of the loan, or if you could reduce the actual interest rate or reduce the principal paid by maybe putting a down payment down, those kind of things. And it was never something that was trying to purposely make you aware of the volume of interest that you might be paying. It was more so, well, this is a matter of life. So just try and reduce it perhaps, as best you can.
Well, and sure, yes, the lower the rate, the lower the volume of interest leaving. So that's fair.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
But I bet they didn't let you look at cash the same way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, there was no discussion of the opportunity cost of using cash. But what I was trying to get at was more so there was never, a focus on, well, what if I'm getting a $20,000 car? How much in interest am I actually paying at the end of the day? What chunk of cash is going to be going straight to the bank? That's never intentionally made to be aware of, I don't think, whether intentionally or not. But that's just not how we're taught to think about it. And so I think that's something for me that is taken a conscious shift of thought when going to finance something, of actually trying to do the calculations out and see what am I actually going to be paying, for this.
Sure, because the car dealer, he's going to be just talking to you about that monthly payment.
Yep.
As long as you can make it fit in your budget, that's all you're thinking about.
And thank you for reminding me. You brought up a great point. We talked about this recently. The drive time, similar to CarMax, is another company that has started releasing all these commercials talking about the make your own payment. And they have like this tool on an app, and you just slide this nice little slider, and it changes your terms to get you to whatever monthly payment you want. So again, this goes to the whole, I think, kind of the own nothing and be happy kind of idea, where you just rent everything and lease everything as long as it's within your paycheck to paycheck budget. That's what it comes down to. It's all just thinking about what's in my paycheck budget, really. And it's okay, can I afford this monthly payment? I'm good. Awesome. So that's, don't worry about the fact that this is now a 15-year loan. I'm not worried about that. But that's where we're headed. Honestly, it's and it's very apparent with this drive time thing. Like, that's just where I go, oh my gosh, I can't imagine what it's like when you drop it down to a $99 a month payment.
You're just paying that forever and ever. That car, you're
for the rest of your life.
The wheels will be falling off, and you're still paying on it.
But I think that's going to be the case for a lot of things. I mean, look at it. We got it with the 50-year mortgage that they're trying to talk about now. It's across the board.
We're making it more affordable.
Yeah,
that's all we look at. Instead of, in fact, to go back to the $10,000 car example, or even your $20,000 car example, using that interest rate right there. That $10,000 car is actually costing more like $12,500 instead of $10,500. So a $20,000 car is actually costing you more like $24,000 or $25,000, right? But we just look at the monthly payment. What's my bottom line out of my, like you said, paycheck to paycheck? And when we have that mindset, is it any wonder we're living paycheck to paycheck?
And this goes back to the thinking long term. I think
that's true.
Boils right back down there. It's so frustrating, I think, for everybody. But that's why we try and find solutions around that.
Yes, exactly. Instead of changing the whole mindset, the whole paradigm shift is what is so needed here.
Right. This feels like a really good place to stop. So far, Nelson has invited us into a deeper conversation by placing John chapter 5, verse 6 at the top of this section. And I really do hope you might consider pulling out that passage of scripture and reading through it for yourself. We all need to consider where our focus has been from time to time. I sure know I do. And in a similar vein, just like the lame man who spent 38 years focusing on the wrong solution for his physical healing, Nelson is also calling us to reconsider that perhaps we too have been looking in the wrong direction for our financial solution. By and large, we've been taught to focus on chasing a high rate of return, rather than recognizing the sheer volume of interest that we are losing to third-party banks every month, year after year. Next week, we will continue this conversation and look at Nelson's airplane analogy and how that is instructive for the environment in which our financial lives operate. Now, if you haven't read this section before, I dare say it will be unlike any other financial conversation you have ever had before. You won't want to miss it, so be sure to grab a copy of the book if you haven't gotten one already, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss part 2. All right, thank you so much for being with us here today.
We will continue this conversation next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Bankless by Design podcast, where we're done with the system and we're doing money differently. Be sure to subscribe, share this episode with someone who needs it, and visit us at banklessbydesign.com to learn how you can start living bankless by design.